hollow footfalls echoing through empty corridors, the primal reaction of flesh brushed by an unseen touch, shadowy figures slipping between the moss-covered boles of ancient trees, strange calls issuing from not quite human throats, piercing the stillness of the night, unusual lights and objects streaming across darkened skies, stolen minutes, and a void filled with obscure and disturbing memories. These occurrences and more are called by many whispered names in many countries around a world we believe we know so well. All of these things share a common thread. I'm Charles Romans, and welcome to the pathways leading to the shadows of legend. Life in all its myriad forms cover the jewel of the solar system, Earth. The planet we call home boasts an amazing array of flora and fauna, with the dominant species, us, perched atop the global food chain. But is that perch as secure as we believe it to be? And as we look down, do we truly see all that exists in the shadow of the pedestal of our own creation? Or does hubris blind us to that which we cannot easily see? There are those who say winged creatures glide through moonlit skies or glare from the darkness with crimson eyes. Are the plaster-cast footprints filling display cases in museums around the globe proof of the existence of the creature indigenous people of North America named Sasquatch in bygone days? Or are they all part of an elaborate hoax perpetrated against an all-too-often gullible society? And are we justified in embracing the evidence of eyewitness accounts and other evidence, or equally justified in denying that any new thing could be discovered under the burning light of day or the cool rays of a full moon? Are cryptids such as Mothman and Bigfoot actual living creatures, or do they only haunt the fertile forests and fields that border the pathways leading through the shadows of legend? We have with us today Doug Waller, a noted researcher on the Bigfoot phenomenon. How are you today, sir?
Doing just fine, Charles.
And if you don't mind me asking before we wade into some of your background and everything, what do you think is the fascination with cryptids in general and Bigfoot in particular?
Oh, just the fact that the history of the creatures goes back so far, into the Native American culture. And, when I really got interested in this and started reading everything I could get a hold of, I learned that the Native Americans had different names, and on some of their totem poles they had representation of a creature that looked like an ape or a gorilla. And knowing that gorillas weren't native to the North American continent, it makes you wonder where did they ever see something like that to make, a carving or whatever from what it looked like, and from the petroglyphs and drawings in caves and stuff. When some of the early inhabitants of our continent were to record things that they'd seen, it makes you believe, well, there really is something to this phenomenon.
So when did you get started researching this?
I was always interested. I started attending some Bigfoot meetings that a man had here in Ohio back in the 1980s. But what really got me started was when I took a job with the county library in the early 1990s. And I started reading all these Bigfoot books, and I had, I read everything we had on the shelf, and then had other ones coming in from other libraries through the interlibrary loan system. And then there was a couple from Cambridge, Ohio that I knew that had a sighting out at Salt Fork State Park. And so we contacted that couple and met with them out there where they had their sighting. And, it just took off. We would try to get in the woods just about every weekend if possible, working the Salt Fork area in Guernsey County, or we sometimes went to Coshocton County, one county west of Guernsey, because it had a pretty rich history of sightings also.
If you don't mind me interrupting, could you describe the geography of that area a little bit? That might perhaps explain why there were so many sightings there.
Yeah, the eastern half of Ohio, unlike the western half, which is flat, but the eastern portion of the state of Ohio wasn't shaved, flat by the glaciers. They stopped. So we've got all kinds of hills and hollows and rock outcroppings and caves. And, I can remember as a child when I'd go to my cousin's property, they had big boulders and big rocks that you could crawl through and go down in and, like little caves and stuff. And it was just fascinating to do that. So there's lots of places for these creatures to hide and, remain basically unseen until they happen upon some squirrel hunter or hiker or fisherman that's walking out through the woods.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, there's not been any definitive proof. We discussed this before. Until there's a certain number of these in a zoo somewhere, people at large won't believe. But what are the evidence? What is the evidence, rather, that you found, and how compelling is that to you?
Well, I have yet to actually see one of the creatures myself. However, we have found tracks. We've found hair snagged on a fence that we believe was left by one of these creatures. We found the twisted, broken trees. One trip we were on, we walked into an area where there had been sightings before, and we smelled a very strong odor like rotten eggs or sulfur. Mm-hmm. And we, a lot of people report smelling that sometimes when there's, a Bigfoot sighting, but not always, sometimes. And we kept walking out the trail very slow, and eventually we walked out of that smell. We continued on our way until we came out to a road, and we had to turn around and then walk all the way back the same trail to get back to our vehicle. When we got back to that area where that bad smell was, it was gone, completely dissipated. So we think possibly there may have been one in that area when we came through. And I think they're able to project this odor possibly through a gland.
A lot of wild animals release pheromones.
Yeah, like a skunk might do, a warning, to keep your distance and keep away. Mm-hmm. Because some people do tell me that, it smelled terrible. It was like rotten meat or dead animal, or as strong as a skunk, but different, and a lot of them mention sulfur and rotten eggs. Other people, have been 5 feet away from them and never reported any smell whatsoever. So I think the creatures themselves choose when and where to emit this odor, and if they feel they need to do it, they will, and if they don't need to do it, then they don't do it.
So you're saying that the smell can't be explained by just being a large, hairy animal that may have gotten wet? Yeah,
I'm sure they don't smell, like peaches and cream, but the odor that I'm talking about, I've had people tell me that they've been in bed asleep and smelled that coming from outside, even when the windows were closed, and it still was so strong it woke them up. So I mean, it's got some very powerful, very powerful kick to this odor if they choose to use it.
Yes, it could be even a means of marking their territory.
Yeah. Well, I think possibly when they break these trees and twist them, I think, it shows me that would require a tremendous amount of strength to do that. And I think it's possible that the males might do that to mark their territory, you know, like a dog
I see.
or a cat will do.
Yes.
To try to keep, the other ones from coming into an area. You know, they're announcing that I'm the alpha male here. You know, these females are my harem. You stay away. And I think that's what's behind that twisting of the trees.
Yeah, and other animals might be able to interpret that, but human beings can't really. You said you had never personally had a sighting, but as we'd spoken before, you said you had interviewed several people that have had sightings.
Right.
Would you care to share a story?
Well, I just talked to a fellow on the telephone today that had actually 3 or 4 incidents take place while he was hunting. And they were similar in that I've had almost the same story come from other people. But one of his stories was that he was deer hunting out of a tree stand in Coshocton County, Ohio. And he hiked way back in about 3/4 of a mile from where he parked his vehicle, and it was a tough walk back into this place, and there was lots of deer signs, but not a whole lot of signs of other hunters being in that area. And he found a really good tree to, go up with he had one of those climbing tree stands, and he went up the tree, got set up, and hadn't sat there very long, and noticed off to one side of him another tree that something ducked back behind. And, he kept watching, and it didn't appear again. And as soon as he turned his head a little bit to watch in a different direction and then looked back, there would be this body behind the tree, that was slanting out, watching him, and then it would duck back in. And he kept that up for about 20 minutes until he was able to actually see what it was that was looking at him. And he said there was this creature that was 7 to 8 feet tall, and it was dark in color and covered with hair. And he said, I knew what it had to be. And he said, the hair stood up on the back of my neck, and I got the shakes. And he thought, I can't sit in this tree with that thing down there. So he started down the tree. The only weapon he had was his crossbow. He came down the tree, and he said when he was about 10 or 15 feet from the ground, he just jumped out of the thing and hit the ground and picked up his bow and left his stand up and everything. And he didn't go back for about a year or so. And when he did, he found that stand. Something had ripped it off of that tree and destroyed it, just bent it and broke pieces on it.
Something that wouldn't have been done by, severe weather or a smaller animal.
No, something with hands had, and he said the cables, he described some sort of cables that it requires to use to go up and down. He said they were snapped. They weren't cut. They were just pulled apart, broken. And then he had another sighting a couple years later in the same county, but it was actually a different township, I believe. But he was in a ground blind. And I said, well, that makes sense since you lost your tree stand. He said, yeah, I had a camouflage ground blind, and I'm in that blind. And he kept hearing noises from behind, and it sounded like monkey sounds or like, chimpanzee or something.
Yes. And
he kept watching out I think this thing had like a little shooting ports, like little slits in it to shoot out of.
Yes.
And he saw 2 does run past, and hot on their heels was this creature that was down on all fours. And he said it was probably 4 feet high at its back, but it was down on all fours, and it was a color of a orangutan.
Okay.
And yeah, it was on all fours, and he said it was right on the heels of those two does, and up the hill it went and disappeared. And here we go again. He came out of the stand or the blind and grabbed his weapon and left the blind and took off. And I said, you need to find another hobby, bowling or something, because every time you're out in the woods, you encounter these things.
Well, he seems to be a magnet for them.
Yeah.
Now, what part of the country was this?
Well, this would be in southeastern Ohio. If you look at a map of Ohio,
okay,
and find Interstate 70, which runs east and west,
mm-hmm.
and where it intersects with Interstate 77, which goes north and south, that's right there in Guernsey County at Cambridge.
Mm-hmm.
And Coshocton County would be kind of northwest of Guernsey County. And that's where those two incidents took place. And I've actually taken two reports from one from the Salt Fork area in Guernsey County and another from Muskingum County, which is just one county west of Guernsey, a place called Dillon State Park. There were two sightings. One of them occurred in, I think it was the last week of February. A trucker was delivering, and he was coming.
Was that of this year?
Yes, this year. A trucker had been delivering out Route 22 out beyond Salt Fork and was making his way back Route 22 to get back onto the interstate. And he had a sighting of, what happened, there were 4 deer crossed the road right in front of his truck. And as soon as they got across the road, they stopped, turned around, and went right back across the other direction to the field that they had originally come out of. He completely stopped the truck thinking, now what are they going to do? They've crossed twice in front of me.
Exactly.
Well, three of them stayed together and went down along the road beside his truck. They went parallel with the road. The 4th deer went up into the field, which kind of went up a hill. So he's watching that 4th deer and, looking to see if anything else is going to jump out in front of him. He sees this creature standing about 100 yards away at the tree line at the top of this hill. He said it was big, bigger than what a man would be. He said it was well over 6 feet tall. It immediately dropped down from a bipedal position, went down on all 4s very, very quickly, and shot out across that field. And he lost sight of it, and he also lost sight of that deer that went up in the field, and he thinks the thing got it.
Mm-hmm.
And he sent me a message to our Softspeed group, and I called him and talked to him on the phone. He was very shaken up by what he'd seen. I think he was a total skeptic until this happened, and he's just having a real hard time dealing with it. He was supposed to come back through sometime, when he's delivering down this way again, and he was supposed to make an appointment to meet with me out there where this happened so I could get some pictures for my next book. I want to put that story in there.
Yes.
And he didn't show up, and I sent him a text message later on. And he's basically just having a real hard time dealing with what he saw.
Now, do you think that's a common reaction when someone has decided that there's nothing real out there?
Oh, yeah. By some people, I've had 2 people that I've interviewed that actually moved away after they had their sighting. One guy didn't even see one. He completely moved away. He lived in rural Jackson County, Ohio, and he moved to Lancaster, inside the city. He just didn't feel safe And he said he had years and years of fishing and hunting and stuff, and he just couldn't do it anymore after that because he didn't feel safe.
So here's a person that essentially knew a lot about wilderness sounds and things like that, and then he experienced something he couldn't explain.
Yeah.
And it shocked him to his core, apparently, and he moved to the city.
Yeah, but, that's the extreme. And then the other, there's always that other person that when they see one, they're maybe shocked, but they're not terrified. And all they want to do is see another one. And they give up their pastime, whether it had been hunting or hiking or fishing, and they're out in the woods every chance they get because they want to see another one. It's like they're just so fascinated by these. It was like a drug to them, and they're hooked. They just have to see another one.
Well, see, right there's a perfect segue to go back. You had mentioned the group that you belonged to before. Would you care to elaborate on the group and describe that a little bit to me?
Well, I started investigating and researching in 2006, and we started our group 2 years later, and it's the Southeastern Ohio Society for Bigfoot Investigation. And we have meetings and campouts, and our group consists of Bigfoot researchers and eyewitnesses, along with people that fall in between those two categories. They're just curious or interested. We've even had some skeptics show up a time or two.
Now, do you have a website?
Well, we have a Facebook page.
Okay.
But we've had some of the eyewitnesses that, they got made fun of and kidded and ridiculed by friends and sometimes family members. And some of these witnesses have bonded with one another and become good friends because, they kind of joined a special club when they, had a sighting of one of these creatures. And yes, there are people who are like Bigfoot magnets that not only see one, they might see another one, or some people have had multiple sightings of the creatures, and not that it's the same creature but different ones. But a lot of that is just being at the right place at the right time.
Now, if somebody did develop an interest in cryptids and Bigfoot in specifically, what would be the best way to go about learning more?
Well, I would read everything I could get a hold of. I worked for a library for 20-some years, and, you can't beat their price. It's free. As long as you return the items on time, there's no penalty or anything. And if they don't have it, you tell them what you're looking for and see if they can't get it for you. I've got a collection of maybe 60 to 70 Bigfoot books that I bought, and most every one I first checked out from a library, and if I really liked it and decided I wanted one of those for my own collection, then I went ahead and bought one. I've read some that I didn't really care for, and I was glad that I didn't go right out and purchase it. But there are literally hundreds of books out there. And I tend to do most of my research that's not actually out in the field. I tend to do most of it through books rather than online. Not that you can't find some good information online, but there's a lot of really hokey stuff if you've ever spent any time, on YouTube.
Right. And which that begs another question. Do you have any preference for reference books? Do you have anything that you would recommend to people, a place to start?
For books, you mean?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. In the back of my last 2 or 3 books, I forget which it is. I have 5 books out now.
Yes.
But I've been putting my book list in the back of my book. And, that's all the Bigfoot books that I've read, and it's got to be up over 200 now. There's a lot of really good authors out there, and fortunately now, when I go to conferences, I oftentimes will trade one of my books for one of theirs. And, it saves me spending a little bit of money that way.
Right.
But John Green was probably the first author that I learned about and started reading his books. And they're not really easy to find now because, he wrote these, I think it was back in the 70s or 80s. But there's just so many good authors out there. I couldn't begin to tell you where to start, but I would definitely recommend going to the library and just,
But a person could ideally buy your book and benefit from your knowledge, and then you have a compendium in the back of it of the books that you found useful.
Yeah.
And what would be the best way for people to find you online?
Well, I'm on Facebook. My books aren't for sale through Amazon. However, they can purchase through PayPal, yes, or they can, send me a letter, put a check in there, and the books are $18 a piece, and the postage is $4. And that postage is $4 whether you buy one book or 3 books or 5 books. I don't up the price any. It's $4. And as I said, I have 5 out. The second book is currently out of stock. It's called Hidden Encounters. Mm-hmm. But I've talked to the publisher about getting some more of them printed up, and I think I'm going to have to do that because I've been having some people that don't own that one that would like to get it.
Now, you also do public speaking engagements, correct?
Yeah. Up until last year when the COVID shut everything down, but I'd been doing talks at conferences and public libraries, especially the libraries. We'd do 20 or 25 a year. We were all over the Ohio, West Virginia, and we had ones scheduled down in your neck of the woods that got canceled from the COVID.
Yes, I remember that.
And we would like to get back, when things, if they ever do get back to normal, we'd like to get back and work some of these libraries again. Because I get a lot of my stories, my reports from people at these libraries. And you don't have to give your name. If I asked you if I could contact you for your story, do an interview, I just need, your name and your phone number to contact you. But when it comes to putting it in the book, if you want to remain anonymous, that's no problem, because a certain number of people do want to remain anonymous. And other people say, I don't care, that's what I saw, and I don't care who knows it. I want to tell the people about these things.
So someone wanted to share a sighting with you, they could just reach out to you through your Facebook page?
Yeah, reach out through Facebook, either contact me personally or go on our SOSFI page, the Southeastern Ohio Society for Bigfoot Investigations, and leave a message on there, and I'll contact you. That's what I did with that fella today, the deer hunter. He left us a message on there, and people want to get it off their chest and want to talk about it.
Exactly, yes.
Because a lot of times, like the trucker, he's still having a hard time dealing with what he saw. And, if I could talk to him again, and I'm sure I could hook him up with somebody that could talk to him that's also seen one, and he's dealing with the same things that guy dealt with, and could help him out a little bit.
Yes, it often helps to share experiences because, well, for one thing, this gentleman here was totally against it being possible. He has to think he's losing his mind.
Oh, yeah. And can you imagine how difficult it would have been 100 years ago?
Oh, no
or
doubt.
even 50 years ago, when we didn't have the internet everywhere and cell phones, and you didn't have Google. You'd see something like that, and you'd be afraid to speak up because they would think you were nuts.
Right.
They'd think you'd been in the moonshine or something.
Yeah, exactly. 60 or 70 years ago, you'd be afraid of being run out of town over saying something like that.
Yeah, that's true.
So, is there any other stories or evidence that you'd like to share today?
There's just so many of them, and I welcome all stories, even the ones that go way back. They're as valuable to me as something that happened yesterday, because I'm trying to preserve these stories, because if they're not recorded and written down, if the witness takes that story to the grave, then that story's gone. And I've actually talked to a couple of old timers about their sightings, and
Yes.
and a couple of them predated the Patterson-Gimlin film. And this old farmer was 80 years old, and I said, well, did you ever tell anybody when you had your sighting? He was a child. He said, who would I have told? They wouldn't have believed me.
Right, yes.
And his father had died, and his mother remarried, and his stepfather was very mean and strict and worked him like a dog. And he says, if I didn't get my work done, I got the belt. And I said, were you afraid of the creature when you saw it? He says, no. He said, I was afraid of my stepdad if I didn't get my chores done. And the creature didn't bother me, and I didn't bother it. It was watching him. He was out in the field with a horse or a mule, and he was plowing.
Yes.
And this creature would stand at the tree line and watch him. And he never told anybody until years and years and years later, when he was married and sitting on the couch one night with his wife, and Finding Bigfoot show came on, and they sat there and watched that. And he turned to his wife and he said, I saw one of those things when I was a kid. And he said that's the first time he'd ever told anybody. And he just happened to read in the newspaper that I was going to be in town giving a talk at the library.
Yes.
And so he went and sat in the back and listened and never said a word. And the program was over, and we were packing up and getting ready to leave, and he was still hanging around. And he come up to me, and that's when he said, I saw one of those things. And I got his name and number and thanked him. And I said, I'll give you a call. And I just let it all come out. He just talked to me, and I could tell he felt so much better after he told me. But this happened, I think it was the late 50s or early 60s, but it was before the Patterson-Gimlin film.
Yes.
So it went way back.
Amazing. Now, one...
And I'm sure there's other stories out there like that. I just need to find them.
Oh, I'm certain there is, because people don't want to share anything that makes them sound different, or in the case of something so extraordinary as Bigfoot, maybe perhaps even make them sound deficient.
Mm-hmm.
So, but one last question, if you don't mind.
Okay.
From the time that you started researching this until the time you are right now, what have you learned? Have you gained amount of satisfaction by the knowledge, or do you still think you have a long ways to go to perfect your understanding?
Well, it seems like the more I learn about these creatures, the less I know. When I started out, I guess I thought it was, a big undiscovered North American ape, but I don't think that's what it is now. They're so intelligent and so sharp and so cunning. I don't really think they would purposely harm you, but I can't guarantee it. I think for the most part, they wouldn't harm you. But if you were to get between one and it's young, all bets are off. It could be disastrous. But some people say, well, Bigfoot does this and Bigfoot does that. Well, when you're talking plural Bigfoot, all of them, you can't guarantee that every one of them is going to follow that same path and be a gentle giant and not hurt you.
Right.
But, I try to get as much information as I can out of these eyewitnesses, and I look for some common denominator on what the witnesses tell me. You can learn an awful lot about the creatures from what the witness tells you. How the creatures acted, the expression on their face, whether or not they made that horrible smell, the vocalizations that they might have made. I had a lady that had a daytime sighting back in 1984. She had 3 little kids, and the kids were playing at an old, it was an old playground, an old schoolhouse that was converted into, I think, the Grange Hall.
Yes.
And she had a baby on her hip and then 2 young daughters, and they were outside playing on the playground equipment. And this female Bigfoot, and it was a female because she saw breasts on it,
okay,
came up from down in the woods and stepped from the tree line and was watching those kids playing on the playground equipment.
Yes.
And the lady was just absolutely terrified, thinking this monster, it's 30 feet away and it's got its eyes on her kids, thinking it's going to, charge out of there and snatch the kids up and steal them or eat them or who knows. But she said in watching the face of this creature, it was enjoying the moment. It was almost smiling.
Yes.
And, I've always read that they're infatuated with children. They're very curious about kids. And I think it heard those girls giggling and laughing and having a good time on the swings and the teeter-totters and stuff. And it was compelled to come up out of the woods and watch. And, needless to say, it scared the mom pretty bad. But the female, the Bigfoot was enjoying the moment. She liked what she was watching, and possibly she'd had offspring of her own, although there was none seen that day, but she enjoyed watching those human girls playing.
That's a unique story. I had never heard a story like that before. I'm glad you shared that with us.
Yeah, that story's from my first book. And that lady, we introduced her to the producer of the Finding Bigfoot program, and when they came to Salt Fork the first time, she told them her story, and her event was televised on the program.
That's fascinating. Glad she was able to tell her story.
Yeah.
But as you said before, though, just because there was behavior of that manner in that particular instance doesn't mean you should assume that all these creatures are gentle. So you have to take them as they come. And would you advise caution for people who are out wanting to search for these things, these creatures?
Oh, most definitely. I would be careful. I read on Facebook people talk about, there's Bigfoot, out behind my property. I've seen them, seen their tracks and this and that. And somebody else will chime in, I'd love to have Bigfoot on my property. I wish I had them here. Well, be careful what you wish for, because some people do have them around their properties and they're not crazy about it. Because, if you start feeding something like that, it's not a fuzzy little puppy dog or a kitten or something. You don't want to get it. You don't want to get it dependent on you for its handouts and its food and snacks, because if you, for whatever reason, stop, that's when the trouble's going to start. So I wouldn't recommend you start something like that.
Very good advice. Well, Doug, we appreciate you being on the cast this evening. And hopefully we'll have you on again soon in the future and discuss this some more. I think you're a wealth of information.
Well, that information is out there and it's free to anybody. Just get to your library and get some books and start reading.
Excellent advice. This is Charles Romans, and on behalf of myself and our guests, thank you for joining us on this walk through the shadows of legend. If you like what you heard, please follow us and visit our website at shadowsoflegend.com. and support our Patreon page to help keep the content flowing. And if you would like to be a guest and share your own brush with a stranger paranormal, don't hesitate to email us and include a contact number. The strange and surreal, the normal and the paranormal are all aspects of the world in which we live. As you reflect upon the stories we have shared, keep in mind that the people sharing these stories are actual, real people just like us. Were the stories shared compelling enough to be given credibility, or should they be relegated to the deeper part of the shadows? But when determining this, it might be a good idea to keep an open mind, because when we look around, we might discover that our own world is less brightly lit than we once thought. Until next time, I'll be waiting for you in the shadows of legend.